Well, hello there. My name is Jeff Bartow, and I am a trust strategist here at Symantec. We are the first, the original, and the leading SSL and TLS provider, and now your partner in providing a pretty good offering to some users and customers who are going to be needing our service. And I hope you watched my language there, because it's not just Plesk customers, but actually consumers who will benefit from what we're going to be discussing today. Now, this is a presentation that I have delivered on behalf of Plesk at World Hosting Days this past couple months over in Rust, Germany. And I've been asked to reprise this again so that you could see exactly what we talked about and fully understand the opportunity that's in front of all of us. So let's get started. The point here is that there is an encryption mandate. Now, I know that's a kind of a mysterious term, but I do believe that there's a big opportunity for us to not only create security, but leadership as well as differentiation with SSL and TLS. Now, this presentation does presume that you know or you can accept what SSL and TLS are, at least as far as acronyms. If you ever want to know and dig deeper on that, we are happy to provide those resources to you. But as long as just knowing what the acronym is and what I'm about to lead you into will actually suffice for what you need to know. So let's get underway here. We're going to start with some basics, and I don't mean this to be anywhere near insulting or anything, but we need to start at square one so that we understand exactly what it is with these widgets that we're dealing with, and that is the SSL certificates. Okay, here's the way these things work. SSL certificates are what we call digital certificates. It's little text files in most cases that one places, and you see over there on the right, onto a server. And that certificate allows a server to do two things. It allows the server to encrypt data as it moves. That's data around a network or data around the internet, or both sometimes. But equally, there is a second function that's often forgotten called validation. And it's the second thing that actually gets done here. Now, I'm going to keep coming back to this over and over and over, so don't feel like you have to remember all this, because I will beat this into your heads. But I think this is a very important point that we understand. These things, the widgets, the things that are going to be provided here are actual certificates, and they get placed somewhere so that something happens. And that something that happens often happens in the context of a browser or some other mechanism like an app connecting to a server. And in that transaction, the server allows these two things to happen. But it's what's connecting to the server that actually asks, in most cases, for these two functions to go on. Okay, we'll come back to that. So I want to zoom back in on these two different elements because they're so important. First, let's look at the encryption part of this. And this is what most people think about SSL and TLS in the first place. You say those terms, and most people assume, oh, this is about encryption. We're going to scramble whatever data is moving while it's moving, and at the point at which it starts and at the point at which it ends are the only places that it's not encrypted. The rest of the time, as it moves around the internet or an internal network, no one except the sender and the recipient can actually read what's going on. Okay, it's like passing notes in class. You remember back in elementary school where you would create a secret code and nobody could read that code, nobody could break that code, but you and the person that you were passing notes with. Okay, remember that when we all did those kind of things? At some point in life, we all created a secret code. This actually creates an unbreakable code. Academically, it is breakable, but not within the time spaces that's actually being used here. It's the same concept, however. We have created this instant code. It's using the SSL certificate to go and do that. However, once you pass that message, nobody can read it because nobody has the secret code until the person who you're sending the message to can actually decode it. And that's encryption and decryption. Okay? And most people think that that's the point of things here, that all we're using SSL and TLS for and these certificates is to encode or encrypt or hide, obfuscate information, okay, so that only sender and recipient can see and nobody else can. People you want to keep this from, and most often these days, that's the bad guys, that's cyber criminals, it's people who want to do harm to your information, to your customers, to consumers, to your organization, what have you. Okay, so remember I said there's two things that are going on here, and let's not forget the second part of this, and that is the validation aspect. And I very deliberately removed this first part out of consideration, the encryption aspect, because the validation aspect isn't just something extra that happens. It's actually a completely equal function that goes on when SSL and TLS are used. It's not just it comes along for the ride. Often people forget that it's a huge function of SSL and TLS, this whole validation function. And what it does is it validates that whoever holds that certificate, where that certificate rides, like on the server, that the owner of that certificate is legitimate and it's really the place that you think it is. And that's to varying degrees. We'll get into that in a bit. But that validation function, also called authentication, can mean exactly that. Am I where I think I am? And the certificate helps the browser and therefore the user understand, yep, this really is where I should think it is. So the perfect example of that, since it's not an encryption thing, is actually to show it. And again, in a browser context, we end up in a place like this. So the question here is, what's the real site? One of these sites is a fake site, and one of these sites is a real site. Now, often people look at this, and I ask when I present this in person, in front of a group, I ask for dynamic, right answers right from the group, and I go and call on people. I'm not going to do that to you right now, obviously. But the clues start to show up once you start comparing these side by side. And the things that people start saying are actually parts of the clue, like look at the address. It starts reading left to right, HTTP or HTTPS, and people notice that right away. Okay, HTTPS. The S means secure. The S means SSL is being used. And they look at the color of that address bar. Here it's actually an old screenshot, but the Internet Explorer browser, that address bar will turn green. And browsers will actually treat some SSL certificates quite differently, but this flavor of SSL certificate we'll get into later will turn the address bar or elements of it green. So they'll also notice other things, like the presence of a padlock up in that address bar on one of them where it isn't present to the other. Which is very interesting to note that if you look over to the right of both screenshots, about halfway down, right next to the sign-in button, there's padlocks in those screenshots. Those padlocks can be faked, but the padlock up in that address bar cannot be. So there's other indicators that people usually spot too, and one of those is in the upper right-hand corner of the screen as it's displayed in the browser would be that trust seal. In this case, it's our Norton secured seal. That nice, warm, friendly circle check mark that people have known for well over a dozen years on the entire Internet. And it's kind of like the good housekeeping seal of the Internet, that this place is determined to actually be where you think it is. So therefore, all the answers say it's the one on the right, and that is correct because all these things, these trust indicators, are actually there. Now, what you don't realize here is you're seeing a function of validation, not encryption. All of this stuff has absolutely nothing to do with data being encrypted. It's entirely a function of validation. So validation is, in user terms, a very real thing that they can see happening, where encryption is something that they actually can't see happening. So therefore, as far as the user goes and sees and experiences a website, validation is a real and meaningful thing. What they take from that is, this really is the site I think it is. I know because I see these trust indicators that I'm safe. The more of them, the more safe I feel. And of course, there's studies from us and from elsewhere around the Internet and other security organizations that say that these trust indicators are real and true, or else browsers simply wouldn't do them. But let's get back to the point here. And I want you to hold this thought because we're going to go off topic here for a bit. And that is, these two functions are very different, but they are completely equal. You can't really have one without another when you're providing SSL certificates. But we also cannot, it's a disservice to customers as well as to consumers, because we see this in browsers, that we speak just about the encryption function. Oh, the data is encrypted, because that really leaves out this function of validation and providing a means for consumers to know that, yes, I really am where I think I am. And in this world of, it's almost like there's a breach every single day and attacks left and right and loss of personal information, consumers really want to know that. They want to know that they're in the right place and are safe to proceed. So very, very important functions, but very equal functions of what SSL and TLS do. Okay, so let's park this thought. We're going to press pause on that part of the thought train and actually switch into something else. And talking about SSL certificates and encryption, we're going to go to that encryption function pretty hard right now. And there's a presumption that encryption is really and has always been just for places where money is being moved. Think about banks. Think about shopping online where you're having to pay stuff, and to some degree where you're putting your personal information in. Because if you're doing banking and you're buying stuff, there's always information about where you live and how to contact you and your email address, and there's usually a login. So personal financial information and personally identifiable information kind of go hand in hand with the presumption of when you're supposed to use SSL and TLS, especially that encryption function. Well, we're predicting that in a matter of years, maybe even year, that 100% of online traffic will be encrypted. That's something that doesn't exist right now because a lot of people aren't using this encryption function. There's a big opportunity to do so, and there's a reason why we believe that that reality is going to take place. I'm going to talk through this in several ways. We're going to actually start at the top of this list, at the 12 o'clock position. We're going to go clockwise, and then we will loop back over onto the right. First one that I'd like to talk about is at the very top. About 2 years ago this summer, Google, in their #1 search site on the entire internet, Google Search, started ranking sites which use encryption, which use this HTTPS or this SSL and TLS certificate thing. Whenever they see that search engine sees a site that uses these certificates, they will rank those pages higher than other pages that do not use SSL and TLS. Now, this is a pretty important thing. So as you're serving customers and as customers are using the Plesk interface and they're trying to build their web presence, well, here's a gift. If you encrypt your entire website using SSL and TLS certificates and you simply invoke that server wants to do this, and when people connect to it, those sites, when they're indexed by Google Search, will rank higher. In our measurements, it's about 5% higher than sites that do not. And frankly, that's a search engine marketer's dream. Like, you want that to happen. Oh, my goodness. 5% might be the difference between page 2 and page 1, or below the fold and above the fold. It might be the difference between position 2 and position 1. So this is a very important thing. But I do want to call your attention to something, and it's a very important word choice. It says Google Search ranks encrypted sites higher, not pages, sites. That means Search prefers to see whole sites using SSL, not just a certain page here and there. So let's pay attention to that. All right, so let's move down. We're going clockwise, and we're starting to see, and you know this because you've probably heard about this, we're starting to see lots of offerings for SSL being free out there on the internet. People can go and get these SSL certificates for free. They don't have to pay anything, and that's an interesting value prop. If I can get this whole encryption thing, well, I want to go and do that. Well, yeah, there's lots of vendors who will actually go and provide those kinds of things. We'll drill into what that actually means here in a minute, because those free things tend not to be monetizable, with the exception of certain cases. We'll get there. Moving clockwise further, we're then starting to see CDNs and hosters and blog sites and what have you making default encryption available. So they're kind of tapping into this free SSL offering, and instead of offering the certificates to the customers who would be posting those sites, they're just making it on, turning it on from the get-go. It's like always on. They understand this. So in that environment, that context, they're just turning it on as a default. Okay, let's wrap around to the other side. We're actually going to start at about the 11 o'clock position here, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and we're going to go backwards in time as we're looking at this. Several months ago, beginning of this year, at the end of January, both Google and Mozilla started doing something where they really advanced the usage of SSL and TLS kind of in a pressuring way. And that is, they started warning users, all users, about sites that do not use SSL and TLS. So it kind of goes hand in hand with this idea of Google search rewarding sites that do. These browsers have decided to start showing when sites are not using them. Okay, we're gonna hit that pretty hard on the next slide. So I'm gonna press the pause button on that one. Let's go back down to about the 9 o'clock position, and let's talk about HTTP2. So HTTP2, new protocol that's coming along. We've all been dealing with HTTP version 1. HTTP version 2 provides some real advantages for users, and in this particular context, there are performance benefits that sites that use HTTP2 can provide to visitors to those sites. Richer media environments, faster performance, all sorts of things like that. What's interesting, though, is that those rich media performance and that faster environment only happens when the browser and the server agree to communicate over HTTP2. If they're not using SSL and TLS said otherwise, then HTTP2 can't happen. Therefore, those elements, those performance elements, that rich media experience doesn't happen. So if you want to kind of look towards the future as to how sites will perform online, sites are going to want to move to HTTP2, but if they want to deliver that performance of those richer media experiences, they've got to be served over SSL and TLS, or it's not going to happen. And all of these are usage of that encryption function. Okay, now I talked with you quickly about those browsers. Let me drill a little deep into that. We're going in our time capsule here, probably about until January of this year. And Mozilla did it first with a Firefox browser, and then Chrome did it next, like a week later. And the it that I'm referring to is that these browsers started to warn users, consumers, whoever is sitting at the browser connecting to the server that could be securing, encrypting that content over SSL and TLS, they started warning users when that encryption isn't happening. That's pretty fundamental. Now, they both do it a little differently. There's some overlap between the two. So let's look at who did it first. Firefox, they started warning all users. It's important to look at that word all. They started warning all users when a page will ask for a password and that page doesn't use SSL or TLS. Okay, so if it's a page, it's asking for a password like a login page, and it's doing so without using SSL and TLS, Firefox will prompt a warning. I'll show you what the warnings look like in a minute. About a week later, Google Chrome started doing the exact same thing, but a little more. They started warning all users when a page will either ask for a password, just like Firefox, or payment information for a credit card, or both, without using SSL and TLS. In other words, remember what I spoke about before. When you're passing your personal information, like a password, or your personal financial information, like a payment, that's when we really want things to be encrypted. Well, now it's not a really want thing. Browsers really want it too, and if it's not happening, they will actually warn users. Now, remember when I pointed out sites that that get a performance boost or this and that and the other thing. These are pages. Okay, let's look at the word here. Warns all users when a page, blah, blah, blah. Okay, they've both been very clear as to what the future looks like. Both of them are going to transition to a prominent red triangle. Okay, so it's going to appear in that address bar. Remember where we saw the HTTPS and the padlock and the green color? That's when SSL and TLS are in use. Well, if they're not in use on these kind of pages, you'll see the red triangle warning, so that international version of warning, hello drivers, hello pedestrians, hello average consumers and citizenry. Warning, something dangerous is about to happen. You need to pay attention. There's danger here. Likewise, they will put in very short, crisp language and in red coloring the words not secure. So visually, in language and in color, in iconography, they will show that a site is not secure, or I'm sorry, a page is not secure. They'll move to this language and this iconography for pages that take payment or passwords. And then eventually they're going to move to sites, entire sites that don't use this. So in other words, sites that are not using SSL or TLS at some point will be flagged. And this is being flagged not just something that you could turn on if you're a smart browser, it comes on by default. It is something that you cannot turn off as a user. It's something that in enterprise context, enterprise administrators cannot turn off. Firefox and Chrome will warn all users in a way that they cannot avoid and cannot turn off whether a page right now is not being secured or whether a site in the future is not being secured. And those warnings will get more and more and more prominent. Okay, so let's look at how Firefox does it first, since they implemented it first. I believe it was on the 24th of January of 2017. When a password is being requested and it's being done so on a website without using SSL or TLS, you will see in the address bar that padlock with a red slash through it. And what will pop down below, once you access that circle I, which most people click on that like, what's the red padlock for? Or red slash through the padlock. And they'll see very strong language right there that says this connection is not secure. Logins on this page could be compromised. And that's very, very important information to consumers. Notice the language here. It's not technical. It's not secure. You could be compromised. Your average ordinary person knows what that means. And again, this is something that a user can't turn off. An administrator can't turn this off. Firefox does this already and is going to continue to do this in increasing prominence. Now, of course, Google and their Chrome browser upped the ante about a week later, and they implemented something themselves, and that is when you come to a login screen, in this case I'm showing a frame because it's not just a page, but frames that appear likewise. You can't cheat and get around that, that if you start asking for a password, that page or that frame will suddenly show up with a warning in the address bar that says not secure. Remember where we were reading left to right? HTTPS, we saw the green elements in the address bar, we saw the padlock in the address bar. Here's something that is before all of that in the address bar. Users cannot avoid it. So it's pretty prominent that if encryption, in other words, SSL and TLS, are not being used and you're asking for a password or payment of some variety, Chrome is going to warn users quite prominently. Now, obviously, Firefox and Chrome do things very different. One shows an icon, that padlock with the slash, and Chrome shows the words, but both of them have been very clear that they will eventually transition to that red triangle using the words not secure and coloring the words not secure in red. Okay, so it's getting pretty serious. The browsers want this encryption thing to happen. And it's already happening, frankly. And remember I said it's not just for banks and e-commerce anymore. There's all manner of sites out there that are already doing this in the media, in photo sharing sites, in simple analytics sites. all across the internet. Social media has really jumped toward this. Review sites, blogs left and right are using this because they understand that users want to know that their information is safe, and that's the encryption function, and that they really are where they think they are. These brands are the real brands, and you're on that site, and that's the validation function. So across all these brands, which are more than just e-commerce and banking, there's also governments that are getting involved. The United States government runs a site called pulse.cio.gov, and what they are tracking there is the adoption of SSL and TLS across entire government sites for all of the U.S. government that's publicly accessible online. Their mandate is to have all U.S. publicly accessible U.S. government sites be using encryption, be using SSL and TLS. And they're tracking it very publicly about what sites do in the government and which sites do not. They're being pretty transparent about it. And right now, about 3/4 of all U.S. government sites that are publicly accessible use HTTPS and use this SSL and TLS function. Okay, but it's not just the U.S. government. Over in the UK, they are likewise doing it. All new websites that are spun up in the United Kingdom that are government sites are mandated to use SSL and TLS uniformly. Okay, so as you see in the presentation, I'm listing all the sources and sites for these things and talking about them openly because we need to be open and aware of this as we present these options to our customers through the Plesk interface. But here we are talking about encryption again, and only encryption, and we put that first because usually that's the first function that we think of. And obviously there's more to it. It's greater than just encryption. We need to think beyond encryption and think about that second function of SSL. Remember when I put that thought on hold? Well, we're back on that. We're back on this whole validation function. Okay, so we talked just a big bunch about what things are coming with encryption and how different browsers, how different search sites, how different CDNs and hosters and providers are helping encryption happen. But we haven't really talked about the validation function until I first introduced it. Let's dig a little more. So let's look at what HTTPS actually does mean. Okay, we're not going to get too technical, but let's look at the assumptions that are typically made. Might HTTPS mean that the site is safe, or that the site is secure, or that the site is patched and has no vulnerabilities? Could it possibly mean that you know exactly who the site claims to be, that the brand that you're on, let's say you're shopping on eBay or Amazon, that it's really eBay or Amazon, or it's the bank where you do your banking, or where you're paying your mortgage, or it's really Facebook or Twitter? Does HTTPS mean that there is no malware in operation, or furthermore, that you can trust the site, or that if it is e-commerce, that if you buy something, that you're sure that the site is going to deliver? Does HTTPS mean these things? It does not. It means two things. First, someone has control of the domain. And second, remember those two functions, that the data is encrypted. And that could mean even malicious data. And that's the strange part. There's a presumption here that if it's encrypted, it's secure. And frankly speaking, that's an error that the browsers are making, that they're equating with secure to mean encrypted. Well, phishing sites, fake sites, sites spewing malware could use SSL and TLS. So let's be clear about what this actually means. Someone controls that domain, and the data is encrypted, and that data could be malicious data. It could be malware or other kinds of things that are going on. It could be phishing site or what have you. So this begs us to get into the different kinds of validation, because encryption is encryption clearly, but what are the different kind of flavors of validation that we see out there? Okay, in the U.S., obviously, we're all familiar with Baskin-Robbins and their 31 flavors. We're going to talk about 3 flavors of validation here. There are 3, and we in the industry refer to them as DV, OV, and EV. That's reading left to right here, and we're going to talk about them in left to right. Let's first de-acronymize those terms. DV is actually what's called domain validation. And when you validate a site that is validated to be what it purports to be and to get this certificate, all that the provider of the certificate validates is that they have control of the domain. Remember I spoke on the last slide that it just proves that someone has, at a minimum, control of the domain? That's what domain validation is. So in other words, for me, Jeff Bardo, if I go and I register jeffbardo.com, I, Jeff Bardo, own jeffbardo.com, I can get a domain validated certificate. It doesn't say anything about me, Jeff Bardo. It just says I control that domain. And therefore, I can get this basic level of domain validation, this basic level of SSL going for me. And that's a DV certificate. They're pretty much good for encryption only. If you want to actually do some validation, this really is the site I think it is. It really is an organization. That organization is real. The person who asked for the certificate actually works for or is associated with that organization. They have permission to do so. That's where we're in the blue box with organization validation. We call it OV, but we also refer to it as business level SSL or TLS. The reason why is because businesses can get this where average ordinary people cannot. As Jeff Bardo, I can go get a DV certificate for jeffbardo.com, but because I'm not a business, I'm not an organization myself, I cannot get an OV certificate for jeffbardo.com because I'm not an organization. There's no organization to validate. And that's what actually goes on in the validation process that the SSL provider will then go and do in order to provide those certificates. They will validate that the organization is a real organization. We will check, we like Symantec, will go and check that that business is registered with either the government or an organization like Dun & Bradstreet or Hoover's or any local registry within the country or the region or, for instance, the EU that is respected by the consumers and the businesses within that geography. So there's a very big difference here between these two flavors on the left, domain validation and organization validation. Both of them prove that someone controls the domain, but only organization validation certificates or OV certificates will demonstrate that, yes, it really is a legitimate registered business somewhere, and this certificate belongs to a server for that brand, that site, that organization. Now, you might be scratching your head then, so what's the thing on the right? Extended validation is the one that would turn the address bar or elements in the address bar green. Now, think back to when we talked about which one is the real site and which one is not the real site. A lot of that action in the address bar happened because of an EV certificate, where it wouldn't have happened with an OV or a DV certificate. The address bar turning green, the padlock showing up way over on the right of the browser, the company name showing up in the browser. Those things only happen with extended validation certificates. EV certificates are often most desirable in, well, you would guess it, where people are trading their own information, their own PII, their own personally identifiable information, or their own personal financial information, their payments, their credit card, their bank accounts, anytime that money or information about them is being used. You tend to see a lot of EV usage because those sites not only want to represent they have control of the domain, they're really a business, but you really are where you think you are. It's not a fake site trying to steal your information or your money. And that's usually the pickup for EV certificates and the sales pitch. You see that a lot in the e-commerce context. Now, this tends to start losing people when they're like, okay, which one is which? Okay, it goes from left to right. The validation and how it's displayed gets stronger as you move to the right. But I like to switch analogies at this point just to kind of drill it into your brains as to what this actually means. And let's look at personal identification. Let's get out of the idea of certificates and technology and that stuff and look at how you could identify yourself. A DV certificate is kind of like getting a library card. Anybody can traipse into a library and say, I want a library card from this public library. And they can say whoever that they decide to say who they are and get a library card in that name. In this case, I can go in and say, my name is Elsie Ann Johnson, and I can get a library card for Elsie Ann Johnson. And as you are listening to my voice right now, you can tell that, first of all, I am not Elsie Ann Johnson because I'm Jeff Bardo. But moreover, that I'm also not female, I'm male. But that's not what the library and their validation process cares about. Do I have control over this name, Elsie Ann Johnson? Well, it looks like I do, so therefore you must be Elsie Ann Johnson. And that's all the validation that they need to do. That's kind of the same thing that as it goes with domain validation. I can register jeffbardo.com because I want to say that I'm Jeff Bardo. I don't have to be Jeff Bardo. Someone else could register jeffbardo.com. I just happen to get to it first. Okay, so that's really how domain validation works and how we look at it as a library card. You really don't need to prove anything except that you have control of the domain. Now, if you look comparing from a library card into something else, let's look at a driver's license for the state or the country that you live in. There's things that you would have to prove to the government in order to get such an identification, like your birth certificate, or some kind of papers or paperwork demonstrating that you really are you. You were born, or someone somewhere in an official capacity asserts that you are really you. And you can't get that state ID until you show those things. You are showing documentation, some kind of proof that you really are who you say you are. So what's interesting here is now you're using external proof to demonstrate your legitimacy, and that's pretty much how it works on organization or OV certificates. So what does that lead for extended validation? Extended validation actually goes beyond that form of ID to something that's more recognized not just in the state that you're in, but more globally. Other countries will now believe that you are who you say you are by presenting a passport, because things which validate you not just to your state but to your nation and to other nations are therefore more acceptable as a form of identification. Now you see left to right, the forms of validation necessary to get those identification become greater, and the more valuable those forms of identification are moving left to right. And it's kind of like that with EV. It's a more globally recognized version because in this case, remember, EV is the one that shows those elements with the address bar and the iconography changes and what have you. This is the most trusted and the most trusted version of SSL because they're the most prominent. It's the validation function is at its maximum. And there's all sorts of hoops, by the way, that the customer would have to go through, not only showing that they're registered with a government organization somewhere, but moreover, that someone else has, beyond the government, has asserted that the organization really is who we think it is, like an attorney, a lawyer, or an accountant, some sort of registered financial expert. Sometimes if we can't get those, we'll send someone to the location to really assert that, yep, that's a location, that business is in that location, they're really them, and this person actually does work there. So there's lots of extended validation that happens there, resulting in this being the highest form of authentication. But we kind of see through the analogy as to the value of things, but also the process that is undergone in order to get these different kinds of identification and therefore the different kinds of validation. The reason I really wanted to bear this out is, first of all, so you know what customers might be choosing and the choices presented to them. But also, let's go back to if I'm trying to prove that Jeff, or trying to create a linkage between Jeff Bardo, the identity, and jeffbardo.com, the site. Likewise with Elsie Ann Johnson, I can get her library card without it even being her. For domain validated certificates, 78% of SSL and TLS certs that are found on servers hosting phishing sites and fraudulent websites, fake sites that use SSL, 78% of them are using DV. I'll repeat, sites that are phony, fake, not the real site. In other words, hey, consumer, you're really not in the place that you think you are. 78% of fake sites use DV certificates. Remember which one that was and how easy it is to get those. I got the certificate for jeffbardo.com simply because I was first to register jeffbardo.com. It's not, I didn't have to prove that I'm Jeff Bardo. Likewise, if someone gets a site that looks like, the letters look like paypal.com, for example, they could go and register that domain without even being PayPal. So we're back to this point. 78% of sites that use SSL and really aren't the site that they purport to be will use DV. That is a staggering percentage. Now, your customers, the people building their sites through the Plesk interface, you don't want them to be known by the company which DV keeps. That's 78%. Well, let's break that out. Okay, there's an organization called Netcraft, and they track usage of SSL certificates. And they did a study. They've updated it recently. This version that I'm showing is from August of last year, where they looked at the source of those SSL certificates, all SSL certificates that are used on phishing sites, fake, phony sites. And at the time, 61% of them, and then look over on the left, another 10% came from free SSL offerings, where either the SSL was provided for free by the site or the server or the CDN, what have you, or the SSL was just some place that you can go and get. In fact, 71% of these phishing certs were free SSL certificates. Well, that makes perfect sense. If someone's trying to spoof a site, they're not going to pay a lot to go and register that. They're going to register that site as cheaply as they can. Then they're going to want to, in order to maximize their profits from being miscreants and stealing information, they're going to want to get the cheapest SSL certificate possible. And if they can, they don't want to pay for it. So the majority of them are going to try to go for these free offerings. And we see that factually to be true. Netcraft has studied this. There's obviously been updates to that. But if you look at the total of the rest of the sites, there's not that many. So of the phishing sites out there, 71% are choosing DV certificates, particularly free DV certificates. So let's take all of this stuff and let's wrap it into a bow. What can you do? What is your role in helping customers? Two things. We've all got to do this. First, on every page that requires a password or a credit card, hop on what Chrome and Firefox are doing right now. Get SSL and TLS in use right now. We got to help customers do that. And we do that by getting SSL and TLS certificates on those servers which deliver pages and frames and content and whatever that ask for payments and passwords. That's right now. We're at the time of recording this, we're already 4 months late if it hasn't been done already. And those browsers are already judging websites whether they're secure or not, and they're calling them not secure if they don't use SSL and TLS. That's happening now, remember, in ways that users, consumers, cannot avoid. So that's an absolute mandate. The second part of that is, remember what's coming next. 100% of traffic is going to be encrypted. HTTP2 is becoming more and more adopted. Google search is now rewarding entire sites that are encrypted. The browsers will warn when a site does not use encryption. So this site aspect, moving from the pages that take payments and passwords onward to the site must be fully encrypted. We've got to help users get there right now. And there's some help that's actually happening in the ecosystem. For instance, the PCI, the payment card industry. In other words, if you accept payments or process payments from bank cards, credit cards, debit cards, whatever you call them, charge cards, gift cards. Those first of all, those sites that are PCI compliant, and all sites that do this must be PCI compliant. They must already use a form of encryption. But in the latest version of the best practices report, best practices for e-commerce from the PCI, again, at the end of January this year, they say, this is their language, not mine, e-commerce merchants should consider using the strongest available certificate authentication. They're referring to EV, by the way, and if not EV, then OV, not DV, for these kinds of certificates that are handling credit card data and PII. Remember I mentioned that, PII and PFI, personal financial information, personal identifiable information. They're speaking that language right there. So they're being explicit likewise. Use not only encryption, but use the strongest available certificate authentication or validation that you can get. And that really sets up a kind of matrix that we could think, kind of good, better, best. Obviously, we need everybody on the same page for passwords and payments and using SSL and TLS there. But the better thing to do is to get ready for site-wide usage because it's already happening. Sites already are encrypted. Look at the next time you go to any social media site. Look at the next time you go to your bank. Look at the next time you go shopping online. Look at the next time you go to your free email service. They're already using SSL and TLS across the entire site. All pages, all servers, all URLs, all subdomains, all content feeds, all of that are using SSL and TLS. That's just the better. The best is recommend the advanced options which build trust. Right? Definitely OV and EV, but something that's available uniquely from us, which is enhanced DV. Now, I put a little subtext down at the bottom as to what that actually means. We at Symantec will block high-risk domains from getting our DV. In other words, they can't come and get DV from us because they know there's a good brand behind it. Because we'll already know that they are a high-risk domain, and we will block them from doing so. We call that enhanced DV. So it's not a full organization check, but it is us knowing something because we're the world's largest security company. We know something about domains and where the bad traffic is going and coming from that we can block high-risk domains. But the mandate continues, and it's simply stated. It's not us and the security providers that lead this change. It's you. And how you present yourself to customers, whether they're your own through the Plesk interface, what have you. You are leading this change. And there's 4 things we got to keep in mind. First of all, offer the SSL and TLS. Okay, we're doing that through Plesk. But second, this is an opportunity to embrace and elevate security beyond just this encryption thing. Because all encryption does is it scrambles data, even bad data. Even malware can be scrambled. Who wants that? We've got to really capitalize on this validation function, and that's where the ability to unlock monetization actually happens. Because you can upsell from ordinary, complementary DV SSL to things like enhanced DV or OV or EV. And that monetization and that upsell is real. It's material. You can do it. You can make money. We've got customers and partners around the world doing so already. That will allow you to, number 3, deliver material business value because now you're actually delivering something that's not just encrypting data. You're helping sites, as they are being built or rebuilt or maintained, actually express to consumers, yes, you really are where you think you are, consumers, and the consumers will reward you. The Internet's a very scary place. There's attacks and breaches and compromises and loss of information all the time. And consumers will reward you to know that you're really a real, safe, legitimate site. And as a result, you enjoy tighter and more valuable relationships, all through the ecosystem, through providers, through hosts, to customers, to businesses, all the way through to consumers. Now, obviously, this is fully configured in the Plesk interface. This is an earlier screenshot of how we had proposed things look, but it's sewn right in there. Over on the left in the menu under Websites and Domains, it's very easy to see what is being offered there. And we are now in the preferred provider position for SSL certificates through Symantec's Encryption Everywhere offering. And those 3 different flavors, look at what's appearing there. In this case, the choice was made to show basic SSL, and that is some DV SSL there on the left just to get people going, but then to allow for upsell with the 2 panels on the right. We're showing Remember, I said business level SSL. In the middle, that's OV, and could even be ED. But over on the right, a way to secure multiple domains, multiple subdomains. In other words, getting ready for this idea that you've got to encrypt the entire site. So it's built not only to capitalize on upsell now, but also towards the motion and the direction for the future. This is a fantastic opportunity for everybody in the chain to unlock monetization and to actually drive the encryption mandate. But the mandate and the choice there is yours. We will support you as much as we can. We ask you to turn to all your support resources through Plesk and available from Symantec in order to do so. And that actually ends up at the end of our time today. So on behalf of Symantec, the original and the leading SSL and TLS provider and your partner in making encryption and validation the most important things that are going on in consumers' minds these days, and in ways that the consumers will reward the businesses that we're all supporting. I want to thank you for listening, and thank you for your time. And let's make sure that we go and create a much safer internet out there. Thanks, everyone.